Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on what's new in Cytara DLX. My name is Will Fitzgerald, and I'm the lead product manager here at Cytara. If you have any questions at any point during the webinar, please feel free to add them to the Q&A section, and we'll answer them throughout the presentation. In today's webinar, we're going to look at some of the new features and functionality that we've added to DLX in 2023. Before we get into some of those features, we'll go through a quick overview of what Cytara and DLX do. So Cytara DLX is our solution, and it is the first iPaaS for science. Now, what does an iPaaS for science entail? First, integrating laboratory resources, applications, and personnel is really at the core of our solution. Our capabilities include options that allow you to automate complex and repetitive workflows to make those repetitive processes easier to complete. We also offer peer-to-peer connectivity between devices, applications, and other solutions within your laboratory to make those solutions more mobile. We provide functionality out of the box that is going to help you accelerate the time to value and offer options that are going to satisfy a lot of the compliance needs of today's modern lab. Looking at the existing architecture of today's analytical lab, there's a heavy reliance on point-to-point connections between resources. This architecture offers challenges in being able to build and maintain integration points. Significantly more time is required to add resources and create connections between new resources within your lab. Cytara DLX, on the other hand, is going to offer a peer-to-peer connection architecture, which offers significantly more flexibility and speed in maintaining and updating laboratory resources. This environment is going to help you facilitate a flexible experience for your users. Getting into some of the more specific features that we're very excited about in 2023, we've focused around sort of three core areas in our two releases in 2023. Those areas are transparency, administration, and our users. As far as transparency goes, we're focusing on being able to provide enhanced visibility into the platform through updates in our audit trail and our orchestration editor. From an administrative point of view, our new capabilities around single sign-on and multi-factor authentication are going to provide you with a more integrated and seamless user experience across all enterprise applications. As far as our users go, the general improvements that we've made to our user interfaces and user experiences throughout the platform are going to provide additional capabilities without the need to understand more of the coding requirements that are going to be needed to complete specific tasks within orchestrations. Going into more of our releases and what each release entails, we had our first release in 2023 was in February, and this was our DLX version 1.8. 1.8 focused on three main features: connection copying, our redesigned orchestration editor, and our redesigned audit trail. In terms of connection copying, prior to this feature being released, all connections would have to be created independently. Each connection that you would create for your analytical lab would require independent configuration of settings, even if connections were similar or related in some way. With the introduction of connection copying, you can deploy and configure connections much faster. So as an example, if you have multiple balances within your laboratory, you can create a connection to one of those balances and copy that connection instead of having to create all those connections from scratch. When you copy connections, it's going to copy not only the type of connection that you create, but also the connection status, simulation mode, log level, and non-secret settings. This is going to save significant time in deploying new connections throughout your lab. The next feature that we included as part of our February release for version 1.8 is our redesigned orchestration editor. The redesign of our orchestration editor focused very specifically on increasing the amount of vertical and horizontal space for users to focus more on configuring steps rather than having to figure out how to navigate the application. We also captured a lot of the challenges in being able to add and configure steps within your orchestration by modifying how our orchestration step chip or orchestration step card was going to work within the application. As you can see in this screenshot, as for a quick example, we have more space that's going to allow you to configure your steps, and the step builder is going to be oriented vertically to allow you to modify the steps that are included in orchestration without losing out on space that's going to be needed to actually configure those steps. The final feature that we included in version 1.8 is our redesigned audit trail. The prior version of DLX provided an audit trail with limited information displayed in the main view. This required significantly more drilling down into individual events within the audit trail to determine exactly what each event represented. With the addition of the columns for event kind, operation, and entity ID, we're providing significantly more information right up front to users to give them additional insights about what each audit trail event represents. Moving on to our second release for 2023, in this month, April, we're releasing our release 1 of 2023, or 2023 R1. 2023 R1 focused on our integrated help capability, single sign-on, and expression editing. As far as integrated help goes, we provided a knowledge base to our users that allows you to review help content outside of the application. With the introduction of integrated help, we're now providing a widget that allows you to simultaneously review help content while you work on a particular action in DLX. So let's say, for example, you want to read an article about how to configure a connection action step. Instead of having to go to a separate browser tab or browser window to review the steps to configure that particular step type, you can open the contextual help widget to that connection action article and read and review the content while you simultaneously configure your connection action step. Single sign-on is another feature that we're including in 2023 R1. Prior to our 2023 R1 release, you would require a username and password to be able to sign into DLX. There was no integration with existing identity providers. With the introduction of single sign-on, we're creating a more seamless enterprise application experience, allowing you to configure tenants to use an existing authentication provider. So for customers that have an existing SAML provider, such as Auth0, Ping Federate, or Azure Active Directory, you can now integrate with those existing identity providers to be able to create a more seamless login process for users. Finally, the feature that we've included in 2023 R1 is our visual expression editor. Prior to the introduction of the visual expression editor, the system would rely pretty heavily on including function transform steps and JavaScript to be able to configure orchestrations. Those function transform steps and JavaScript code is used for creating, modifying, manipulating, and mapping data. With the introduction of the visual expression editor, we're reducing significantly the reliance on JavaScript and function transform steps. This feature is really going to open up the application to allow slightly less technical users to be able to configure orchestration steps, as user interface capabilities will help drive a user through the configuration process rather than requiring JavaScript to be able to modify and manipulate data that's needed within orchestrations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch into DLX and we can take a look at some of the new features and functionality that we've included in the past 2 releases. So I am going to be working within this orchestration. The first thing that you're going to be able to see within this orchestration is the improvements that we've made to the orchestration editor's user interface. As you can see, I have significantly more space within each of these cards that I can use to not only configure my steps, but also configure the options that I need to be able to process orchestration steps. On the left side, we have our vertically oriented orchestration step configuration card. I can use this section to add and remove steps from my orchestration. Another thing that we have included within this release is the ability to name steps. So to provide more content or context around what an actual orchestration step is doing, you would now have the ability to add steps and provide names for those steps. So I'll take an example. If I wanted to include a user input step, instead of just displaying to a user that this is a user input step, I could give this step a name to let someone know what this step is actually doing. So I could say, add file to input. If I wanted to create a user input step that we're going to use to collect a document from a user. We're also using the vertically oriented card here to process some additional actions related to orchestration steps. Say, for example, I wanted to remove a step from my orchestration. The confirmation message to confirm that I want to remove that step is going to display directly within that step chip, instead of the previous version that was going to provide a confirmation message that would cover the entire screen. Just a small update to the user interface, but should tremendously improve our users' experience. As you can also see in the list of steps on the left, we've provided the step index numbers. If you need to reference a step index number within a subsequent step option, or you need to troubleshoot an issue that you've encountered during your orchestration, having these step index numbers is going to provide you with a very easy way of figuring out which steps are causing problems or which steps need to be addressed. I'll go into a data store connection action that I've created, and we can look at how the expression editor is going to assist users in creating and mapping data within an orchestration. So if I move into my step options here, for a data store connection action, what I would need to configure is a key for my data and the actual data or value that I want to use to store. In this case, what I've done is I've created a data object. So I'll go ahead and open that data object, and using the object editor, I would have the ability to configure exactly what key value pairs I want to store within my object. In this case, I'll start with the date field that I want to store within this sample data. So what I've done is I've created a reference to the triggered at date. In the expression editor, we're providing a test run capability that's going to allow you to see how data evolves throughout the process of configuring your expression. So if I go ahead and test this expression, I can see what the output of this particular field would look like. So I have a date, but if I wanted to modify the format of that date, so instead of the standard format that DLX provides, perhaps you want to have this displayed or stored in a more human readable format. In addition to creating references, we're also allowing users to add transform functions that are going to allow you to manipulate data on the fly. So I'll add a transform to this particular data field. And in this case, what I want to use is my format date transform. With the format date transform, I have the ability to define the format that I want to use by clicking on the icon here to open up additional options. And in those options, I can specify a format and a locale format that I want to use to store this date. So in the format, what I'll go ahead and do is I'll define the format that I want to use, and I'll say 2-digit month, two digits for the day, and 4 digits for the year. When I apply that transform to this triggered at date, now what I will see in the output is this readable 2-digit month, 2-digit day, and 4-digit year output. So instead of having to, again, going back to writing a function transform step that's going to allow me to process that date format, I can now perform that formatting directly within the application or within the options. Looking at our second data field within our object, I'm storing the state that I have collected in step 0. Now, again, if I wanted to manipulate this data, so instead of showing the full name of the state, I only wanted to show the first 4 letters. I could add a transform to this particular data field, and we could use our substring transform to specify exactly what start and end index I want to use within my this transform. So I'll start at index 0 and I'll end at index 4. So once I specify the start and end index, again, I can test this expression and I can see that now just the first 4 letters of that previous string are going to be included whenever I process this step. Looking at a slightly more complex example, I've also included an array of samples within this orchestration. So if I look at the output, you can see I have 10 samples Each one has data such as a vial number, an injection volume, number of injections, and so on. We can use the expression editor and the transform functions that are provided within the expression editor to filter arrays based on a particular criteria. So what I'll go ahead and do here, I'll add a transform to this array, and I'll use the filter array transform. With the filter array transform, I have the ability to define an expression that I can apply to each element within that array to filter the array based on the information that I actually want to store. So let's say, for example, I only want to look, or I only want to store samples that have an injection volume greater than 3. What I can do is I can go into my reference and I will select the item that I want to use within this expression. In this case, I want to look at just the injection volume. So I'll select the injection volume. We also have the ability to add operators. So I can specify that I want to look at, this greater than operator. So I'll add the greater than operator. Then I can specify the exact number that I want to use in my filter. So I'll go ahead and enter the number 3. As I mentioned, I want to look at just samples that have an injection volume greater than 3. Once I apply that filter to this particular array, you can see instead of having 10 items within my output, I've now filtered this array down to just 7 items. And each of these items are going to have an injection volume greater than 3. Once I've completed the input that I want to use for my step options, I would also have the ability to test run this expression. You can see for this particular output, not only do I have the information that I had included here, I can see the entire object's output. So I would be able to review the entire output of that object prior to completing this step. So for future executions, I can use previously executed data to verify or validate my expressions and make sure that my expressions are running as I would expect. So we've looked at how the expression editor applies to step options. The expression editor also can be applied to step conditions. So I'll look at this notification step that I've created. For this particular notification step, what I'm doing is I am generating a notification to users, letting them know that the temperature has dropped below an allowed threshold. So this could apply to environmental monitoring conditions. If your temperature drops below a particular threshold, you can generate a notification letting people know that the temperature is lower than the accepted threshold value. Where I can actually specify that condition here in this condition section for this notification, I would be able to go into my reference data. And in this case, in step 0, I'm collecting weather data. So I can open up my data viewer here and locate the temperature that I want to use as the value that I'm analyzing for this particular condition. So I'll select that. Select that that temperature value, and again, I can add an operator here. So if the temperature drops below 10 degrees Celsius, I want to make sure that this notification gets triggered or executed. So again, I can change this second value to a number. And what we'll do is we'll input 10 as our value that we're going to compare the temperature being collected to. I have the ability here as well to test run this expression based on the last execution of this orchestration. I can see that the output would be false. Now, that only applies to, again, the most recent execution where the temperature was 14 degrees Celsius. If in the future this orchestration gets executed and the temperature goes below 10 degrees Celsius, this notification step would get triggered. So these are, in a nutshell, some of the features that we've added in our 2 releases in 2023. I will go ahead and go back to our presentation here. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter those into the question and answer section. We will hopefully be able to address all those questions during this presentation. For any that we need to follow up on, we will make sure to reach out to you separately. Thank you again for joining, and we appreciate our users' continued support for our solution.